Wait, is this your third funeral ever? Stellan, my cousin Irene's oldest, who's about 16 and was at her grandfather's funeral, just nodded. Well, not to brag, I said, but it's actually my third funeral this year. And it was only March. A deep voice behind me piped up. Well, not to brag, but I've been to 3 funerals in the last 2 weeks. I turn around and I see a man in his late 60s, early 70s. I find out later he's an in-law of my Uncle Don, whose funeral we're at that day. And I say, oh, yikes, I'm sorry. And he says that it's fine and that it's what he does every weekend, and it's his way of keeping in touch with family and friends. So I used to have a much better attitude about funerals. I used to be good at funerals. In the early 90s, I have a extended Irish Catholic family, and maybe a half dozen of them died in a few years. And we got into like a solid routine. My parents would drive us to Cleveland like we did on holidays, and I would hang out with my cousins, drinking pop, which was forbidden in ordinary times, mixing all the flavors, called a suicide. Sometimes we'd think about the caskets we wanted. I wanted a bright pink Barbie one. But then we go through the whole scene. You know, we behold the body, we go to mass, we sing on Eagle's Wings, and then we go to somebody's house, usually grandma's, and we eat and we talk more. And I've always had, as long as I can remember, I've had a baseline of existential dread, which might have something to do with going to half a dozen funerals before the age of 10. But I don't remember funerals exacerbating it. But this year I've been to 5 funerals so far, and the year's not over. And it's the first time I've really had to process grief as an adult and without, the layer of my parents, I think, and that whole generation insulating me from it. And I haven't been great at it. The first funeral this year, there wasn't a body, and the denial that allowed me to have, I was like, well, maybe he's in witness protection. It was like painful, honestly. It took some time to process. And I think, you have to sort of deal with the platitudes and the complexity of like trying to crush a whole life into a few sentences, that are repeated to you. And not all funerals are family funerals. And when they are family funerals, my cousins are busy. They're delivering eulogies. They're helping me carry my grandmother's casket. But by my last funeral this year, which was for my Uncle Dan, I think I finally got it right. Instead of hanging out in the family room with the Jimmy John sandwiches and the cookies, I stood, among the mourners in sort of the larger area. Instead of freaking out that there wasn't a body, I looked at pictures of my Uncle Dan in his life before I knew him. Instead of only talking to my brother or my parents, I talked to my aunts who told me, my Aunt Teresa is going to retire and only do things she enjoys. My Aunt Annie, who was married to him for 20 years, said, and like with real sincerity, that I let myself believe that the 20 years she got with him is more than most people get, and like she's going to be fine. And I also talked to his college roommate who had driven 5 hours in from Indianapolis, who I think had talked to no one at that point. And he got to tell me about, Dan rushing a fraternity when they were 20. And I got to tell him about Dan's lifetime trip with his family to Ireland after he retired. And at the end of the funeral, after Dan's pickleball friends and his poker friends and his Irish American Club friends had left, there were about 20 of us still there. And between my mom and her 6 siblings, they had printed out the lyrics to this song called The Parting Glass, which is supposed to be like a One for the Road song, and popularized by the movie Waking Ned Devine, which is a big deal in my family. And, and they handed out little thimblefuls of whiskey or water, depending, to everyone who was still there. And the first few verses, I was like, this is a little schmaltzy, this is a little hokey. We got like the bagpipe in the background, and they're talking about living your life in good company. And it's a little pedantic, they're telling you how to stand, they're telling you to gently rise, they're telling you what to toast to, health whate'er befall. And they're even like telling you what to say, at the end you say good night and joy to you all. But by the third chorus, I was like getting into it, and looking around, at the good company that I was in. Um, and so I did it. I followed the rules. Rose gently. I lifted my glass and I called softly, "Good night and joy to you all."